Hello, Thor, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Hey, hello, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm good.
How's things?
Well, winter has arrived in Iceland.
Winter has arrived.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's actually quite cold outside, and it snowed in the mountains and the mountain passes yesterday and the day before.
Okay. Well, it is distinctly more chilly in Sweden now as well. I have to say the summer is certainly gone, but no snow yet. I mean, at least not here in central Sweden. Oh well, but what's the eruption doing? I mean, it's still going on.
Yeah. It's doing well actually. It's continuing, and it's in a lull at the moment. So the surface activity is not going as we speak, but we had.
Let me just quickly bring up the view here. I think you can see that now.
Yeah.
So this is the live cam.
In early September, we had an 8.5 day quiescence or lull in the surface activity or the visible activity. And then we had this quite a long, I think it was almost 6 days long episode. It's began in quite an interesting way. The magma came up through a crack in the northwest crater wall, and part of it actually was spouting to crater number 5. Part of it was spouting out of crater number 5 and forming a little lava flow on top of pre-existing lavas to the northwest of the cone. And more interestingly, though, is that further to the northwest in Geldingadalur, so in the northwestern part of Geldingadalur, we had lava coming up through best way to sort of secondary vents out in the flow field. And they were clearly not coming up through any new fissures that opened up or anything like that. They seemed to come up from a lava that had pooled in the northwestern part of Geldingadalur, and that was anti-gassed magma that pooled there. And then it basically found a way through the crust of that lava pool and erupted. And there were like 4 vents active when the activity was at its best. And they just sort of spread out over this the surface of this pool, and then they formed this beautiful lava on top of the existing pool, and built a new pond on top of it, and quite nice sort of walls around that pool, and then eventually that broke out and it drained. And shortly after that, there was a surface breakout a little bit further to the east, almost directly south of the cone, and that broke out with quite a force. So it actually initially that lava moved forward through the southern part of Geldingadalur as a wave, and then cascaded down the slope into Nátthagi. So that was actually quite exciting, and it was moving so fast that people could not run away from it.
Whoa!
That was that fast. So
because
luckily
so far
no one was
been a very
in front of it.
Eruption, but okay, wow.
Yeah, and so that and then that activity, sort of that the bocca that opened up there in the south of the main cone stayed active for the rest of this episode, and the activity came more pulsating as the episode continued.
I see. Okay. Wow, this is very interesting. So now the eruption is going on for quite a while now, and of course, there's a lot of detailed changes. A lot of people seem to wonder about how long the eruption continues, and I know that nobody can say that for sure, but it certainly has now been longer than the 2 previous eruptions in Iceland this century. Now, what's your feeling? I mean, would you like to express anything about the duration of the eruption?
Yeah, there are a few things that we need to think about, and even though we don't know necessarily what they're implying, but in this context, I mean, I've said this many times before, the eruption can, stop tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it also can continue for another 30 years or anything in between. And we basically just don't know, because eruption is not giving us maybe any clear signals of what is coming next. So
that's my impression as well, because with these lulls that you mentioned, there could be a week of very low activity, but that doesn't mean anything is calming down.
No, and there is, in these lulls, there is activity, and what we don't know how much that activity, but it's all confined within, in a subterranean, or basically within the lava flow field. So it's been fed into the lava flow field through pathways that we don't see. Basically.
Right, so it's just a lull at the surface, but actually
Yes.
things are of course continuing underneath, and there's magma movement, there's magma bubbling away effectively.
Yes, and I've said that before also, that because the way the eruption started and how it had maintained its supply, for these six months plus that has been going on, and by that is also the longest eruption in Iceland. Since 1963 to 67, or since the Surtsey eruption. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking it's certainly longer than the Eyjafjallajökull and the Holaround eruption, but of course it goes back a long way further. I was limiting my thinking in this century. Of course, you're right.
So it's quite an impressive eruption from that point of view. But also, like, the supply was low from the beginning, so it basically just drizzled out from several wets, really, which is very different from most eruptions. Because most eruptions, you build up pressure in the storage system prior to eruption, and when the pressurization of that exceeds the tensile strength of the roof, then you have a rupture and eruption ensues. And usually that starts with fairly high discharge or quite a powerful eruption, and then it tapers off fairly quickly, and as the discharge drops below a certain level, then the eruption stops. Basically you have used up all the extra energy or this overpressure in the storage zone, and you can't drive the eruption longer. Now this one came out at a very low supply rate to begin with, a few cubic meters per second, and has maintained that all the way through. And I think the reason why it did that is because it is not driven by pressurization of the storage zone. It's more driven by the fact that we had plate movement on the plate boundary, and that opened a path for magma that was sort of a semi-ready to come up, but not necessarily quite ready, but it could come up, and that's what it did. It came up and it just basically sort of seeped out of that storage tank and keeps seeping out of that storage tank. So it's a tiny little hole in a big storage tank, and it takes a long time to drain it.
Drain out, I see. Yeah, I see what you mean. And of course, the tectonic setting on the Reykjanes Peninsula with the strike slip systems is exactly that. You get little basins opening up, or little kind of cavities, I guess, at depth, and they will allow magma to slowly seep out. It's not super overpressured that it would, be close to an eruption, but because of this, it would start to gradually seep out. That would make sense in this case.
I mean, the driving force is probably more the buoyancy of the magma than it is overpressurization.
And it wasn't overpressured. It wasn't, pushing up too hard. I mean, I can see that. So.
And I mean, of course, there's slight overpressurization of that as well. But anyway, that's sort of what I think happened in this case. And that's why I think it can be long lasting. It doesn't mean it will be, but it can be. That, as long as you keep that little hole open, then the magma will just keep on flowing out. And because it's
of course, the other thing is
large tank.
Once you have a hole open, then you will also kind of decompress, and you will cause a little bit of degassing, and all of these things might actually kind of keep the thing going in sort of a mild chain reaction. At least that's how I picture it. So
it probably has a little bit of CO2, and there's clearly CO2 seeping out from the deeper storage zone. There's no, and that CO2 that is coming up in this eruption seems to be sort of more or less coming from that, and then sort of diffusing up through the crust in some form. And all the surface activity that we've seen, the visible activity that we've seen, the lava fountains, the lava, incandescent lava pools, and the surface flows and things like that, they are all driven by shallow degassing of water and SO2. And what people don't realize, when the crater has been full of lava or magma, as we see it, a lot of incandescent material, that most of that volume is actually gas.
Right.
Those big bubbles that are coming up through, and that's why also it's so easy for it to drain down. See, when when you run out of the fresh batch of magma that is providing the gas, you take the gas out faster than you can, replenish it. And so that's when the episodes end, and basically they drain down really quickly.
That's right. Yes.
That's because it's mostly gas volume, and it's just.
That's my feeling as well. This is I discussed it with one of the PhD students who took some videos earlier in the year about this overflow, and then almost immediately afterwards, the level in the vent is going down dramatically, and it's because of gas, I guess. Yeah. And then our initial results say that water concentrations are rather low, 0.3%.
Yeah, they're about 0.3%, but the bubbles. The largest bubbles that I've seen from there are on the order of 50 meters in diameter or something like that. So
well, and this low concentration implies that the degassing will be very shallow. So the water degassing, and then that happens in the vent to a large degree. If the vent has a certain depth to it, then
I think it's all happening in the top 100 meters or so.
That it has to be, exactly. Yeah. And then much of the level inside the vent is actually kept up by the volatiles. And that brings me on. I got one question about the tremors, and I'm quickly going to share my screen if that's okay. I hope you can see that now. Share. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Wonderful. So yeah, people are wondering about the blue wiggles there. And this was about, I guess, a week ago. So, and it was going on for about 2 weeks beforehand, I understand.
No, it was, that's the last episode, which is about 6 days long.
Right.
If I remember correctly, it could have been a little bit longer. From the 11th, so to the 18th, so it's a little bit longer.
Yes, it's a little bit longer. It was
7 days. It's
another few days, almost a week here, I think, but I haven't followed it in detail. But if you say the 11th, that makes sense. That's about right. Yeah.
It started on the 11th, so it's about 7 days. 7 days of activity, surface activity or visible activity. And what we see in there, this is the tremor, which is basically reflecting the pulsating nature of the activity towards the end of that episode. Okay. And so you had, bubble streams come up with a bit of fountaining, and then they drop down, and then they picked up again. And the periodicity of those pulses is on the order of a few minutes, maybe tens of minutes or so along those lines. And that's why you have this sort of a dramatic sort of a pattern or blue.
The blue, the frequency is going.
And then the episode stopped, and there's been a lull in the activity, at least the visible activity since.
I see. Yes.
So it's approaching again the length of the previous lull in the activity.
Which brings us back to this, the lull. So
yeah.
Okay.
And this is actually quite an interesting image as well, and people sort of may not have necessarily made the connection. See, there's a lot of degassing taking place at the vent.
Yes, here.
There is gas streaming out of the vent, and part of that is, without doubt, SO2, and probably some water as well. But that might not necessarily be continuous outgassing. The continuous outgassing is probably CO2, but the pulses of SO2 and water are indicating that we are replenishing the shallow part of the plumbing system
Right.
with fresh magma, because you're getting that gas out. You know, you're not going to have a continuous degassing of something unless you replenish it.
So you're implying that the gas fluxing that is continuing indicates that there is actually magma that delivers this gas. So indirectly, the gas fluxing at the surface indicates that there is still magma there, and it's coming and filling back up.
Yeah, it has to be replenished. So it has to be. You have to be. You degas magma, then you have to bring in fresh magma to maintain the gas flux.
That's right. And the yellow portions here, I assume that's sulfurous material?
Yeah, mostly sulfur precipitation. Yeah. There's a little bit of white specks around as well, which are most likely some fluorine compounds.
Okay, yeah. Well, our sulfates might also be white once they oxidize.
They can also be.
And they can, of course, be there as well. Absolutely. Great. I'm really grateful for the update. I have a last question for you, if you don't mind, and I'll stop sharing now. And that is, someone asked me, is there anything good about this eruption? And I think I have an answer, but I wanted to see what you have to say.
There's a lot of good things about this eruption. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity for a scientist.
Yes, I agree.
To actually really document in detail sort of the low intensity, the low discharge end of the basaltic spectrum. I mean, this is equivalent to the opportunity that Pu'u'o provided in its days, but and hopefully this one will continue as long as Pu'u'o, so we have that opportunity.
Making it a very expensive research project, but yeah.
but also because of its accessibility, it's been really good for both for the Icelanders who liked going and looking at eruption, and that increases also the general knowledge base of Icelanders about eruptions, and also for tourism.
That's a major point, I think, particularly in the pandemic, with travel being quite restricted, but loads of people were making the effort to go and see the eruption. So. I think this might have kept the tourism in Iceland at a slightly, better level than in some other places.
Oh, it definitely has helped. It probably not as critical as people think, because the Icelandic government had done implemented some actions that actually we're going to support the tourist industry through the pandemic, and so this has definitely lightened the burden, so to speak, and there's no doubt it has helped significantly. I mean, so that is the good thing about this eruption, and also its size, and low intensity has enabled both scientists and also other observers to get really close.
Yes.
To the vent, and you. Also, it's easy to connect the vent activity to what's happening in the lava flow, because you can see both at the same time. They're not that far away from each other. So there's a number of really nice advantages to this eruption. And also, it's in a perfect place. Since we were going to have an eruption in Reykjanes, it couldn't have picked a better place, because it's away from most of the infrastructures, and
I was about to say that
you had closed valleys and things like that, so you just
and
minimize its impact.
None of the pipelines have been broken. None of the electrical power cords. Nothing seems to have suffered. I guess warm water supply to Reykjavik is still all going okay. The airport is not affected. So, having just seen footage from La Palma over the last few days, I mean. Whoa, how unfortunate. I mean, I was quite excited about a potential eruption in the Canaries, but seeing now that there's hundreds of houses destroyed and plantations and things like that, I mean, it does spoil the whole scientific fun that one might have. So, because all the human suffering is really making it almost, emotionally unbearable for me to kind of find enjoyment in that. So while this is very different on the Reykjanes now, because the eruption is just gorgeous. Nobody got injured. Nobody got no fatalities, no infrastructure problems. it's actually a super eruption in that context.
It is. I mean, and that's, you know, that's very fortunate. I mean, and
Yes.
let's also be perfectly honest about it. It's pure luck.
Of course,
and very unfortunate for the people of La Palma, you know, having an eruption on the island. One can always say they should have known, because, you know, it is a volcanic island and it's bound to erupt again. But it also shows that, you know, how, you know, what's the right word? How fiddly nature can be, you know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I heard the two sides of the argument before, because the current lava flow is not so far away from the 1949, the western lobe of the 1949 lava flow. There was one going to the eastern part of the island, one to the west, from several vents on the crest. So the type of eruption we see on La Palma right now is very similar to some of the previous eruptions. So one could make the argument that the people could have known. And then, of course, the other side is that, well, this was 1949. Human memory is a rather fickle thing. We tend to forget, and the probability that things happen in a very similar pattern within 100 years or so, yeah, it's not easily assessed. So I don't want to blame anyone for building in that area. It's a lovely flat spot of the island, agriculturally very attractive. I think it's bad luck, if you ask me, rather than I would not strictly blame people. But on the other side, you're right. It's volcanic. It's like in Iceland. I guess the eruption in Iceland could have been closer to Reykjavik with a bit more bad luck, you know. So
yeah, absolutely, well, absolutely. See, and it will happen. You know, it will happen here that we will have eruption closer to major population centers, and they're going to be
then you
impacted.
Wouldn't blame anyone either, because
no,
I wouldn't, certainly, because
no, but we can do a little bit, a few things about it. We can be better prepared, and we can also take more notice of the fact that we will have eruptions in the future, even if there are 50 years between eruptions or whatever it is, they will happen. And you can use different methods to actually sort of develop maps which show the likelihood of eruption sites. You know, you can never guarantee that, you know, it will only be confined to a certain area, but the likelihood of eruptions, if you know the eruption history of the place and things like that, you can look at the pattern and say, well, this, you know, these places are going to be more likely for eruption, and then you can design your infrastructure and your population centers around those likelihoods, and by that you might be able to minimize the impact of future eruption. You can never stop it, or you can never prevent it completely. So those are kind of things that I think people who live on volcanic islands have to start, you know, think about these things. They have to learn to live with the volcano, and they have to think in a longer time scale than you know the social memory allows us to do. We, you know, and that's why we have to use the scientists and the people that are like the civil defense and things like that are thinking about these things, and let them help us plan.
I fundamentally agree with you. This is the big job of us scientists here, to provide this information and provide this knowledge to reduce the vulnerability of populations around, particularly on the volcanic islands, but around volcanoes in general. And this is often slightly misunderstood, I guess. So I think there's still some challenges ahead to come up with good structural, infrastructural plans that allow us to reduce the vulnerability of our technical support systems, as well as, of course, the populations.
Yeah, we definitely want to decrease the vulnerability, and also what we need to do is try to influence and change maybe the perception.
Yeah.
So that, you know, it all comes in, and we got to work on that social memory as well.
I think that's one of our biggest weaknesses. We are human, you know. So. Okay, Thor, thank you
Okay.
very much. I kept you quiet for quite a little while now. So thank you for your insight, for your knowledge, for the update. I'm sure the people looking at this will be really appreciative. So thanks a million, Thor. Then I'll say goodbye, and we'll be in touch about research very soon anyway. So, and have a good time and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you, and
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.